Shavua Tov. Today's daf is Mem Zayin. We'll start with the Mishnah on the bottom of Mem Vav Hamid Beis. And we're still studying the concept of Tikkun Olam. HaMocheres atzmo v'esbonav li'ovdei kol chavim. He sold himself and or his children to Akum 3 times over. Ein podin oso. He got so used to doing this over and over again. Apparently, he just wants to evoke the response of the community to be poda him. And therefore, we make a takana, we're going to say, ad kan. Once it could happen, twice it could happen, but not a third time. We're not responsible to be poda you, because he's going to be encouraged if we keep being poda him to do it again and again and again. And of course, he makes a profit on the deal. If the father during his lifetime sold his children to Ovdei Kol Chavim, the children are not at fault here. There was no guilt on behalf of the children. And therefore, once the father dies, then the takana no longer applies. We're afraid that if the children will be raised in a non-Jewish family because they were sold to an akum, they will be nishma and the yilmadu mimasei maroim, and therefore we will be pod to the children, despite the iniquity, the guilt of the father. The Gemara says, Amar Rav Asi, v'hu shemochar v'shana v'shilesh. When the Mishnah says that we're not going to be pod to someone who sells himself to the akum, that's because he did it once, he did it twice, and thrice. And now we're not going to be podin. But on the first 2 rounds, we will be podin. The Gemara tells the following. Hanu b'nei bei michse. There were people who sent from a certain place, which is called bei michse, the Yazvi Zuzeh, these people were constantly borrowing money from the goyim. They ran out of funds for payment. Asu v'kagarvelehu, and they came to the goyim, and when the goyim encountered them, they took them as shevi, as captives, as avodim, in lieu of the payment of the debt. Now, asul kame de Rav Huna, it's not exactly clear to me, maybe you have it in your commentaries there, how did these captives come in front of Rav Huna to ask for a pidyon? I mean, l'chora, the way I understood it, an eved is like incarcerated, he can't just roam around freely. So that I can't answer, but in our day, we could say he picked up a phone and he called the posek hadar of Huna. Amalahu, my eved lechu. What can I do for you? Now, at this point in time, the Gemara seems to be oblivious, or shall we say Rav Huna is oblivious, to the statement and the qualification of Rav Asi. Rav Asi says that we exclude Padiyah only on the 3rd round. Amalei, Rabbi Abba says to Rav Huna Limadatana Rabbeinu, we even heard it from you yourself, that Vahusha Mocha V'shana V'shilesh, that the halacha of the Mishnah, that we're not pod as someone who sold himself to a guy, that only applies on the 3rd round. This was the first violation. Amalei, Rav Huna responds to Rav Abba, Hani Mirgal Regili Diavdulachi. These people from the Beit Michse were regilim. They did it over and over again. Every time they would borrow money, they wouldn't have money to pay back. The goyim came and took them as captives, as avodim, and they relied on the fact that we, the community, would come through in the clutch and redeem them. And therefore, the Mishnah, even in this case, would say the Tikkun Olam of Ein Podin also applies. A man sold himself to cannibals. Again, I don't know exactly how he gets away from the cannibals, but he shows up in front of Rabbi Ami. And here we start today's daf Mem Zayin. he says to Rabbi Ami, Pirkan, please, I beg you to redeem us. They're going to eat us up for dinner. Amalei, Rabbi Ami says, Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah, so it's only that we could be poda your children after your death, because we're afraid that you'll be misariv, you'll be mixed up, the child will be mixed up growing up in a monastery, in a temple of Avodah Zarah. But kolshkein hacha deika k'tola, and how much more so are you guilty of selling yourself to people who are going to behead you? Amalahu, Amalei Rabbanah Rabbi Ami, hi, this person, we don't have to be poda him. Yisrael mumarhu, for a different reason. Forget about the Takanas Chachamim. This Jew has lost his status in Allah as a mumar. A mumar is someone who's posel shchita, he's posel edus, he's not part of a minyan. And he eats nevelus and trefus. Bad enough that he sells himself to cannibals, but he is a trefin yak. When do we define the status of a person as a mumar? That's not just because he eats nevel and trefa. A classic case of someone who eats nevel and trefa is called a mumar l'teyavon, meaning he has two pieces of meat in front of him. One is kosher, one is treif. If they're both the same price, he would certainly buy the kosher meat. He's not lahachis. He doesn't do it deliberately to rebel against the Torah. He does it to save a buck. That's called a mumar l'teyavon. And therefore, when he eats nevelus u'trefus l'teyavon, he's not considered a mumar. A mumar is someone who's lahachis. And therefore, we have to be poda someone, even if he's a mumar l'teyavon. Amalei. So the Chacham respond to Rabbi Ami, in this case, he had a choice of eating kosher meat or non-kosher meat, and the testimony in front of Beis Din about this man is that he chose dafka to eat the nevelu treifa. Even though there's no financial loss in eating the kosher meat, nevertheless, he lahachis decided he's going to eat the non-kosher meat. Amalei, Rabbi Abi responded with regard to that person who sold himself to the Ludoi, Zil, Lokashavki li dafrakinuch. He said to the man who was begging for redemption, the Chachamim did not give me permission to redeem you. And now the Gemara tells a whole ganze story about Reish Lakish. And there's one important introduction to this story, which I came up on my own, and Baruch Hashem, I found it in the commentaries. And this is Reish Lakish before he did tshuva. And as you and I know, Reish Lakish was a well-known bandit. He was like the head of the bandits committee at the organization of bandits. And Reish Lakish Zavin Nafshei L'Ludoi. He was such a tough guy, such a racketeer, such a mafioso, that he had total self-confidence that he'd be able to defeat the Ludoi. So what did he do to prepare himself for his confrontation with the Ludoi after he sold himself to them? He probably made a nice profit on the deal because the Ludoi paid, Reish Lakish was a good piece of flesh. Shakal v'adei chayta v'galgalota. He took with him a round kind of a bag or a sock, and he took with him a stone that was round. And Reish Lakish said to himself, Amar Gmiri, these guys are very used to Diyoma Basra. On the very last day before they kill a person, they give him his last will, his last request. Called the boy minei avdi, and they'll do whatever you ask them. It's very primitive mentality, but ki hechi delechel adme. Why? They wanted to get a mechila from him on killing him. So they said, you know what, we'll make you a deal. you could ask for your last request, your final request. We'll grant you your last request, and then we'll kill you, and you'll be mochel us for killing you. Yom HaBasra, on the very last day, they were about to take Reish Lakish and kill him. Amruleh, the Ludoim said to him, what's your last request? Amaluch, be'inon akmetinchu vosvinchu. I'm asking that I tie you up and sit you down, v'kol chad minaychu amche chaysa upalgo, and give me my revenge that I could hit each one of you 1.5 times with this sack. And sure enough, they agreed. You could write a children's story about this. Kamtinu vosvinu, he tied them up, put them down, and kol chad minayu kadmache chad chaysa. And Reish Lakish was so powerful that even with one smite, he was able to kill them. Nafik nishmase. Charkine lishine. As they were dying, these Ludoim let out a certain noise. They would move their teeth and grind them together, and there was like a voice that sounded like they were laughing. That's what it sounded like, a laugh. Now, as he's killing one after the other on line, of course, Reish Lakish didn't want the others who were waiting for their turn to get a patch, that they should know that their colleagues were killed. Amalei, Reish Lakish says to the one that got hit, you're laughing at me? Akati poshloch gabe palga de chaisa. Don't laugh at me, because you will still be getting another half of a makkah. We agreed to 1.5. I only gave you 1. And in this way, katlinu lekulu, he was able to kill all of them. Nafak v'yasa, and he went out as a free man. Now, why is it so important that the Talmud has to tell us this story? I'm not exactly sure. Maybe because the Gemara wants to show how Reish Lakish, before he did tshuva, was so powerful. Now, once the Gemara tells the story about Reish Lakish, it brings another kind of behavior pattern of Reish Lakish. Yosef v'ka'achal v'shasif. He would sit down, he would eat, he would drink, and he never was mitzamtzem. He never tried to limit how much he would eat or drink. He would spend unlimited amount of funds. Amalei Barte, his daughter, objected, don't you need to buy certain things like bedding and so forth in order to go to sleep at night? Amalei, so Reish Lakish responds, Biti, my daughter, crazy curry. I don't need a place to sleep. John, do you have a little AC? I don't know, it's very stuffy. That I don't know. All right, don't waste your time, just in case. Enoch nafshe, as Reish Lakish was passing from this world to the next, Shava Kabad Morika, he left behind him what's called a kav, which is a certain volume of karkum, and it bothered him. V'koral anafshe, and he quoted a pasuk in Tehillim describing his situation, the azvu lacherim chelon. So he says the following in the name of the Chassam Sofer, Hatam Shitztayer, why was Reish Lakish so upset? The Gemara in Eruvin Nudal, says, Ein odam tzorech lidog lohaniach Yerusha lebanov. A person, after all, doesn't have to get upset if he doesn't leave an estate to his heirs, because it's not clear whether the heirs will take good care of his estate, or maybe they'll be ma'abed it. But rather, because Reish Lakish was a Gazlan in his first Gilgul, he needed to return to the Nigzolim all that he had stole from him. And he had stolen such that he was left even without a pillow or a bed to sleep on. And I guess he tried to return everything, but he was stire on this Kav Morika that he had to return to the Nigzal, and he couldn't find the Nigzal and return it. So it was left in his estate. Okay. The tzaddikim mash'irim lacherim chelam, kevet shekol ruchusham shalahemhu. So chelam here is a reference to their property and their possessions of the tzaddikim, and everything that the tzaddikim leave over is legally theirs. There was no gezel, but the rishoyim, what they leave for their heirs, are stolen goods. And Reish Lakish was afraid that now he was leaving to his children stolen goods. The Mishnah says that you're not allowed to sell karka in Eretz Yisrael to goyim based on the pasuk in Dvarim Perek Zayin Lo Seichanim, which the Gemara in Avodah Zarah Daf Chaf darshins Lo Sitim Lehem Chanoya Bekarka. This was part of Meir Kahanel of Shalom's argument all the time, you know. Now the Mishnah tells us the man violated this Isur. He went in and sold his property in Eretz Yisrael to a guy. We're going to force him and require of him to buy back part of that karka at least, and make sure that he gets the first payros that ripen on the tree, even if he has to pay hon to'afot, in order to guarantee that he will fulfill the mitzvah bikurim. And we're going to have a whole sugya here about whether this mitzvah bikurim applies midoraisa or only midrabanan. This was the way that Chazal established that people would not sell their karka to goyim in Eretz Yisrael because they realized they'd have to pay an exorbitant amount of money to buy back payros from the Bala Karka, the guy who bought the Karka, in order to fulfill the Chova of Bikur. And now the Gemara presents a machlokes between Rabbah and Rabbi Lazar on the most fundamental issue that's relevant in Eretz Yisrael to mitzvah tluyas ba'aretz, and that is sale of a land to a guy. Amar Rabbah. First, we have the opinion of Rabbah. This is called Ein Kinyan La'ovi Kocham Lafkia Kedush Eretz Yisrael. Afal pi she'ein Kinyan La'ovi Kochavim bi Eretz Yisrael Lafkia midei meiser. Even though when you sell karka to a goy, it remains in Eretz Yisrael. It remains sanctified by Kedushas Eretz Yisrael. And you cannot be mafkia to remove and undermine the chi of maser and truma and yovel and bikurim. Shenemar, the pasuk says, ki li kol haaretz. Li kedushas haaretz. Li means the kedushas haaretz is mine with a capital M, and the kinyan of the akum cannot undermine the li. The li means the Kedushas Eretz Yisrael. But nevertheless, it's not that the sale of the karka per se to a goy in Eretz Yisrael is invalid. The sale is valid. The Kedushas HaKarka remains in place. And that's called Yesh Kinyan Le'ovikocham Eretz Yisrael Lachbar Boboros Sichnu Ma'oros. The Guf HaKarka actually belongs to the buyer, in this case the goy. Therefore, he could do whatever he has to do to destroy, to dig holes and boros, different sizes and shapes of boros in the karka. So that even though in terms of Kedushas HaKarka, the sale does not in any way impact on Kedushas HaKarka, because Rabbah holds Ein Kinyan Li'akum, but nevertheless, as far as Dini Mominus is concerned, the karka has now been transferred over to the ownership of the guy, and he possesses the karka. So that's the shita of Rabbah, that Ein Kinyan Akum, because of the pasuk Li. Rabbi Loza disagrees. He holds Yesh Kinyan Akum. Omer afal pi sheyesh kinyan liovi kocham be'eretz Yisrael lafkia midei maser. The ownership of the goy on the land in Israel undermines the kedushas hakarka, and there's no chi of maser. Shenem areishis degancha, and we derive from the pasuk degancha velo dagan ove kochavim. Now this is not a ptur in the Maisa Digun, but rather it's a ptur in the very kedushas haperos. Aval ein kinyi lo v'kol beretz Yisrael lachbar ba boros sichin amoros shenemar lashem haaretz. So whereas Rabbah puts the emphasis on kili kol haaretz in the parsha of Shemitah, Rebbe Loza puts the emphasis on lashem haaretz umaloa in Tehillim, teaching me that the gufa karka never is acquired by the guy. The guy cannot acquire ownership in the gufa karka. He's not allowed to touch the karka. The karka belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Lashem ha'aretz umlo. However, on the contrary, as far as Kedushas HaKarka is concerned, Rabbi Loza maintains that the Kedushas HaKarka is paka. It completely is undermined and invalidated. Why? Because of the pasuk degancha, which he interprets to mean the karka itself, not the maisa digun. B'maikam niflagi, Mar Sava Rebbe Loza holds degancha. Only the dagan that belongs to Yisrael is chayav and masav lo dagan obikachavim, which means that according to the shita of Rabbi Loza, yesh kinyan akum lafkia mikdushas eretz Yisrael v'liftar michiv maser umar sabah. But Rabbi holds that the word degancha doesn't imply anything about the karka itself, but rather diguncha, the maisa digun, which is called meiruach, the winnowing of the dagan. And that has to be implemented by the owner, who in this case has to be Yisrael, v'lo digun ovekochavim. But if the digun was done when the karka was in the reshus of the ovekochavim, then that's not diguncha. But Rabbah is not willing to say that diguncha or degancha refers to the ownership on the karka, because according to Rabbah, ein kinyan akum lafkia mikdushas eretz Yisrael. Omer Rabbah mino amidole. How do I prove from a Mishnah, in this case a Mishnah in Pei on the fourth parak with regard to Matnas Aniyim, that the halacha is ein kinyan akum lafkia? Because it says in the Mishnah, haleket v'shikva pe'eshel ovdei kochavim chayovim b'maser elim kein hifkir. Now we have a principle in Matnas Aniyim that hefkir poter mileket shikhu pe'eh. And the Mishnah establishes that even if the field belongs to a guy, there still is a chiyuv maser. And the tvua that was left either in peah, in the corners of the field, or shikha that was forgotten during the ktsira, or leket, things that fell from the hand of the kotzrim, all that is chayav and maser. Unless the balas sadeh, in this case the guy, made the leket shikhu peah hefker. So Gemara says this makes no sense. Hechi domi ilem Yisrael. If we're going to say that the karka belongs to a Jew, and he left leket shikhu peah for the aniyim in his sadeh, v'liktinhu, and then the guy came along and he gathered together this tvu of leket shikhu peah ovekachal. Then he sold it back to a Jew, and the Mishnah says that the Jew is chayav to be mafresh maser unless these payros were hefker. And now the Gemara says it doesn't make any sense. Why Elam Kain Hifkir? Why Elam Kain Hifkir or Mifkir V'Kaime? These tfua, this dagon is hefker, because the Baal Sadeh, who in this case was a Yisrael, in this possibility, he left it for the Aniyim, and that gives it a din of hefker. And therefore, how could the Mishnah possibly add a stipulation, Elam Kain Hifker? Forget about Elam Kain Hifker. El Olav, and therefore by process of elimination, it must be that the karka belongs to the Ovdi Kochavim, and he left Leket Shikupei Leketinu. Yisrael, the Ani Yisrael, came to collect the Leket Shikupei, and the Mishnah tells us that the Chayav to be Mafresh Maser, because a guy, an Ovdi Kochavim, has no mitzvah of Leket Shikupei, and therefore there's no Shem Leket, Shem Shicha, Shem Peh that's Chal on the payros to pater them up from Maser. And therefore, the Chayav in Maser in the hands of the Aniyah Yisrael, unless the Akum was mafkir them. Taiba de Hifkir, holo Hifkir Chayav. We see clearly, says Rabbah, that the Tvua that grew in the Karka that belongs to Novi Kochavim is Chayav in Maser. Because Ein Kinyan Li Akum Lafkir, Kedushas Eretz Yisrael, lo, the Gemara rejects it. Li Olam di Yisrael. The karka belonged to a Jew, and the Yisrael left Leket Shikupeh for the Aniyim. Who collected this tfua of Leket Shikupeh was a god. Uda Kamrit, now you'll ask the kasha, why are they chayiv in Maser? Von Mifkare, Vekaime, from the very moment that the Jewish owner left in his field for the Aniyim Leket Shikupeh, they became Hefker. And the rejection is Nehi de Mifkare Adaiti, the Yisrael Adaiti the Akum, mi Mifkare. When the Yisrael was Mafkir, the Leket Shikupeh was for the sake of the Aniyah Yisrael. But he didn't have a Maisa Hefker under the das that the guy would collect the Leket Shikupeh. Al Manas Kain, he wasn't mafkirid. So if he wasn't mafkirid for the sake of the Ovdi Kochavim, and the Ovdi Kochavim took these grains, these shibolim that are not hefker, therefore they remain chayiv in maser unless he was mafkirid. And now the Gemara wants to prove Rabbi Lazar yesh kinyan liakum lafkir mi maser. Toshma, we learned in the Bryce Yisrael, Shalokach Sodim Yavakacham Ad Shalo Hevi Shlish. There are two critical moments that generate the chiyuv of Hafrashas Trumas and Masers. One is Havash Shlish, which literally means 1/3 of its gidul, but that's not really what it means. But anyway, and the moment of Digun, which means when they winnow the tvua and they remove the chaff, and it becomes what's called a kri. Now, in this case, in the Brisa, the chiyuv trumas of maisos, which emerges with Havash Shlish, took place after the Yisrael had purchased the karka from a goy, which means that the purchase and the transaction took place before Havash Shlish. So now the moment that generates the chiyuv trumas of maisos, which is Havash Shlish, the sada was in the hands of Yisrael. V'chazu machalo, and after it reached Havash Shlish, and potentially it's already chayav in trumas and maasros, and now he sells it to a guy. Chayeves b'maser. If the Yisrael will purchase the karka from the guy on the second round, he'll be chayav in maser. Shekvarnis chayva, because he already became chayav in maser the moment that at Havash Shlish the karka was b'shus Yisrael. And now we're being medayik from the Lashon HaBraisa. Nischayva, dafka im nischayva b'shus Yisrael. When it reached Havash Shlish, then there's a chiv masav, and machra Yisrael in Nachri. If the Yisrael had sold his property to the Nachri before Havash Shlish, then lo nischayva. then in the Rishus of Israel, he's not chayav b'maser. We see that yesh kinyan li'akum Eretz Yisrael afkia kedushas Eretz Yisrael le'inyan chayav maser. And this is going to be a proof for the shita of Rabbi Loza. And Gemara rejects. Hacha b'mayaskinon. What's the case of this brisa? We're not talking about Maser Doraisa, but rather Maser D'Rabbanan. This Syria. Syria is Aram Tzova, in the north of Eretz Yisrael, and it was conquered by David HaMelech himself. And that's called Kibush Yochid. And we have a fundamental machlokas. What's the status of Kibush Yochid? Because Sarah, this Tana holds Kibush Yochid Lav Shmei Kibush. So as far as the Torah is concerned, this is not called kibush. It doesn't engender Kedushas Eretz Yisrael in the land in the expansionary war of David, and it doesn't have Kedushas Eretz Yisrael. And therefore the Rabbanan made a takana that peiros of Aram Tzova are Mirabbanan Chayv and Trumas and Maisros. And even though, according to Rabbi Loza, Yesh Kinyan Li'akum Lafkia. Just 1 second. Let me just make a quick calculation. I'm sorry. The kasha is here on Rabba. I got mixed up in the names. Rabba was the one who held that ain't kinyan li'akum. And if that be the case, then it's only because it was in the Shus of the Akum at the time of Avosh Shlish that he's going to be parted from Maser. Otherwise, he'd be Chayv Maser when the Jew purchases the karka from the God. Is that not a proof that if it wasn't in the Rishus of Yisrael, B'shas Avosh Shlish, that he purchased it later, he would be chayiv in maser. I'm sorry, he would not be chayiv in maser. I'm sorry, the mathematics. He's only chayiv because it was in the Rishus of Yisrael at B'shas Avosh Shlish. Otherwise, if let's say the Israel purchased it subsequent to Avosh Shlish, then he'd be potter from maser. Why? Because yesh kinyan li'akum lafkia, and that proves the sheet of Rabbah. So the Gemara says, no, even Rabbi Loza would agree that in this case, ein kinyan li'akum, because we're going about Paris, Syria, which are only the Rabbanon. And since it's only a chiv to Rabbanon, the Rabbanon were mekil, and they said that yesh kinyan li'akum lafkia. Let me just write this down so I don't, because we're going to have it over and over again. Right, Rabbi Loza, ein kinyan akum lafkia. But in Trumas Hamaisis to Rabbanon, for example, Surya is hikilu and yesh kinyan akum lafkia. Okay, I just wrote down that's the summary because once it's written down, I have it. Toshma. Now we have a Tosefta in Trumas. Yisrael v'oviko chav shalokhu sada v'shutfus. Right, the Torah says ariso sechem v'lo shel aku. Now we have a case of shutfus. So as far as that half of the sada that belongs to the Yisrael, there's an Isur Tevel and a Chiv Trumas Amaisros. As far as the other half of the Shutfis that belongs to a guy, then there's no Chiv, there's no Isur Tevel and no Chiv Trumas Amaisros. So now we have like the the shutfis doesn't divide up into half the field here belonging to the guy and half the field belonging to the Israel, but rather every single piece of Tvua is both a mixture of the shutfis of Israel and the shutfis of a guy.